higher income, lower income kid, the difference in amount of time put into their development and learning is dramatic, but that can be equalized with after school and has been. But as you said, for every one kid in a program, there's 4 waiting to get in Michigan. Some more funding is needed. We've got to work on the pipeline of talent to support kids and the quality piece. One of the things that we're working on is a program called MiLEAP, and it's an after-school app for after-school providers, not for kids, because we don't want more screen time for kids. And right now, it's a free after-school app. It's like Masterclass, if you've heard of that. So we have playlists. Governor Gilchrist did a playlist on entrepreneurship. And so if you're an after-school provider, you can go in there, you get it for free, you get all of these amazing content pieces, a couple thousand pieces, and it shows you what you can do and how it can roll out. And so the idea is to kind of standardize after-school without standardizing. To create quality across the board for free. So, we've got the 1619 project. We've got all kinds of things in there.
Great. Michelle, what's the state's position on that? Did the funding increase happen because of learning loss, or were there other reasons that we increased funding to after school?
So you've all been in a lot of sessions, in a lot of conversations over the past few days. There's not a single issue that you've been talking about that after school cannot play a role in supporting. You want to talk about talent development, we want to talk about mental health, career navigation, childhood obesity, academic achievement and readiness. We could do this all day. And the opportunity to be able to have kids in high quality environments where adults care deeply about their success, their academic success, their mental health, their social emotional skills, and are supporting them as a proxy for their teacher or for their parents in times when they are somewhere else. There's incredible power in that, and I think I haven't found someone who says, I don't know, right? I'm not sure that makes sense for Michigan. And so it feels like we are in a moment where we're trying to say, how do we align, accelerate, amplify the work that's happening in schools, in communities, and make sure that we are giving our kids as much momentum as possible. I have a 6 and 8-year-old. We play with those cars that you pull back when you let them go, they fly. We're thinking a lot about that, of how when we're supporting our kids, how are we giving them together, how are we giving them as much momentum as possible to support them to succeed, but also to make sure that our communities, our state, our employers, our businesses that don't exist yet, that they are really set to thrive, and after school has to be a foundational piece of that, and not for some kids, but an option for all of our kids, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Great. We have a question in the back.
Hi, Diallo Smith from Life Remodeled. I'll address this question to Kim. You mentioned that you have 1,000 students that you're serving now, which is incredible. I wanted to hear your story of where you started and how you got to be able to serve 1,000 people, specifically through funding. And then secondarily, I know that you're working on a great project that's going to be able to help serve more children. And just talk about the challenges of receiving funding to support the physical spaces that these after-school programs can take place in.
That's a loaded question, but I'll take it. For you.
Did you plant that question?
No, I did not plant that.
It was too well stated.
But I would say we've had conversations, so I know where that's come from. And there are several organizations who are in this room who have heard my story. I actually spoke at a breakfast in December. Developing Kids will celebrate 18 years next month. And I would tell you that at that breakfast in December, I kept thinking about, why are they asking me to speak at this breakfast? And it was to entrepreneurs. There were some nonprofits in the room. And I always say we have grown tremendously over the last couple years. But that's because I left my full-time job to just do this. With $40,000 as a grant, I said, I'm doing this. And I got paid a lot more than that when I left my job. But for 14 years, I labored in this work, working full-time and building Developing Kids. And it was very difficult for someone to say, we're going to give you funding to support a salary. So there are a lot of organizations who are doing this work, the leaders work full-time jobs. They are taking a lot from their households to make these organizations run. And it was quite a journey. And I would say that leaving that really sparked the growth of developing kids, because now I could dedicate more of my time to really building the organization at the level that I know it could be. But it takes being introduced to people, having a network. I heard someone say earlier today, I'm just a girl from the west side of Detroit off of 7 Mile. I am the statistic that everyone said probably wouldn't graduate from high school, definitely wouldn't go to college, and the list goes on because of how my environment shifted in high school. But yet I'm here. But I mean, I have those resources to say, let me call my uncle to introduce me to the CEO of this company, or to help me get this resource to run this program or this organization. So it's a journey. It's definitely a journey, and it's growing. And I mentioned that in December, I spoke at that breakfast. As I kept thinking, and I was actually praying about what I would talk about, I'm sitting on my couch 3 days before I'm running across an old email. I have no idea why this old email popped up, but it was 10 years old. I talked about how I had $1,080 in our bank account. And we have been operating for 8 years, and that's what I had. And I was waiting for several organizations to pay us out for the grant. So some of us know about that, how you may be awarded something, but it takes 6 months to actually get it into your account, right? And I sent that to the board treasurer, but yet I was getting ready to speak to at the breakfast, and I had $1.8 million in the account 10 years later. So a lot of tears, but it was the journey that brought the tears of how 10 years ago that was the story, but not giving up and then being where we are today.
Wow. Kimberly, thanks for sharing that. My experience is some of the greatest grassroots after-school programs have similar stories.
Yes.
Ridgway, what do you see across the country? Is this you have the big programs, you know, the one I mentioned earlier, Junior Achievement, certainly one that affected me, but these grassroots programs, Downtown Boxing Gym, the local programs just seem to have such passion. Is that how you see it?
I think that's absolutely it. I mean, they meet kids where they are, the needs, where the kids, you know, come in and know the needs, and that's where the secret sauce is the breadth of after-school programs and opportunities that are provided for kids across the country is just huge, and that's you know, it's as simple as you know, giving a kid a baseball bat to play with, and it can be, you know, going to coding or things like that. You've got after-school programs that meet kids where they are across the country and all different things, and you've got a lot of really passionate leaders, or just the education providers themselves that are in it, that are, you know, doing it as a part-time job because they care.
Right, and the fundraising, Kimberly, is not as sophisticated out of the chute, right? Not trained to get in there and get that done the same way.
Absolutely, not having the, having resources that can support for leaders to go and learn how to make that ask, how to take how to collect data, and then how to use that data to tell your story and show your impact of what the work that you're doing. I would definitely say that fundraising is, you know, being here today. A lot of us have had opportunities where we're sitting here today and we're in the rooms with people who we couldn't get meetings with. So, but how many organizations do not have the ability to come and be here today?
Yeah.
And Mr. David, I would love to add to this conversation in terms of the quality of a nonprofit and the power that they have.
I was going to ask you to comment on leadership as you see it,
For
King.
sure. So I would like to add that aside from the funding, we need there needs to be an actual connection between the leader and the student, and allow the student to create their own ideas. There's a lot of times where we tell the student things, or we tell them to read this book, and I actually had this conversation with Mr. Khalid Sweeney himself, where we were saying, you know, students, we tell them to read this book, or we tell them to research this, and what we tell them is what they go by, right? And usually that's the way they think, when instead we should advise them to do their own research, right? And to advise them to think on their own. And I feel like including that will, even with Skimming Foundation, including me in this entire conference, you know, this is an opportunity for me to grow as an individual and to grow into my career path, right? And with this opportunity, I have an opportunity to do my own networking and do my own research in terms of who's in the room. So it's just allowing those opportunities aside from the money, because if you say you had all the money, what's next, right? You have this facility. How are you impacting your students? I feel like that's the key.
Thanks for sharing that. It's
Sure.
I think it's a mistake to tell kids what they need, young people, what they need, instead of asking them what they want.
Exactly.
And I applaud the leaders that did the right thing. And it sounds like you pushed back a little bit.
Right.
To have to say, hey, let me research this. Let me tell you what we ought to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
How comfortable were you doing that?
Well, I mean, that's the whole idea of mentorship, right? Your mentor should advise you the right ways to go, but your mentor should also advise you to go against them sometimes, to challenge your thoughts, to challenge what they taught you. If your mentor is truly your mentor, they don't mind you going against them sometimes, or like having not an argument, but like a debate about what's right for them, what's right for the student, because it's the student's career, it's the student's life. You know, so it's okay. It's perfectly fine for the student to challenge the mentor. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Wow. Well, another question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Muntakim, trustee with the Skillman Foundation. And on the note of developmental skills, my question's for King. As a youth leader and an activist in Detroit, which we have seen on display at the President's Youth Council, what would you say has impacted, in terms of after-school programming, impacted your developmental skills, not only so far in your journey, but continues to drive you forward in your future endeavors as well?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Thank you so much. In terms of building my leadership, in 2020, I, along with other youth, led a youth march where I spoke. And the youth march was called One Nation Under a Groove Youth March, right? And it was only youth led the march. And I was a keynote speaker for the march. And they chose me because of the simple fact that I was passionate about what was occurring at the time. I was a 4.0 student. I'm still a 4.0 student, even during the time of COVID. And that actually improved me as a student, because I understood that if I allowed this tragic time, my mom was sick for 42 days with COVID-19. If I allowed that time to let that sink into me, to let that sink into my soul and allow me to be less, then I already lost, right? A boat only sinks when water gets inside of it, not when it's surrounded, you know? So, you know, that's what that time taught me. And throughout that time, I've just been a leader in terms of what I'm passionate about and what I've been able to learn. You know, I've also I wrote several speeches. One was about redlining in 2021. It was for the MiLEAP challenge, and I was one of 12 finalists that would have said their speech in Washington D.C. It was in 2021, so we couldn't do it in person, right? And also the very next year, the following year, I wrote a speech about how us in the Black community, we should first care about our community and what we do before we ask the politics to do stuff for us. Because if we don't care for what we see in our communities, if we don't care for what we see in our backyards, if we throwing cups in our backyards, then why would anybody want to help us out if we're not helping ourselves first? So thank you so much. It's a plethora of things that I've done after school, and I don't just retain it. I actually give it back to the people at my school. I'm actually class president of my class as well. You know, I'm salutatorian of my class. So it's like I'm pushing to be a leader all the time, you know, regardless of anything that I do in school or out of school. But I want to make sure that whatever I'm passionate about is always being heard.
Terrific. Question in the back.
Nancy Windsor, City of Port Huron. First of all, thank you for all the work that you guys are doing with kids, and big shout out to Downtown Boxing Gym. I think their program's awesome. But my question is really around kind of off what the last guy said about the capacity for dollars for, you know, infrastructure to build these programs out. And I know everyone's fighting for that, and we appreciate that. But like even safe outdoor spaces, looking at mental health, obesity, all the things that we're talking about here. Has there been anything at the state level, or can we start talking about that, where we start making these spaces, you know, for kids to play outside at after school programs or at schools where they feel safe, you know, because like you just said, like structured play is great, but also it's nice to let kids play, right? And I don't believe that there's a lot of money that's allocated to those things at the schools right now. Is that something that people are looking at for the future, Michigan?
Michelle?
I want to start by just clarifying some language. So when we think about the goals of after school, safe places for kids to spend their time, we call that a lot of things. We call that childcare. We call that pre-K. I call that second grade for my family at 12:44 on a Thursday. We call it latchkey. We call it summer camp. All of those places, when we think about positioning this conversation in Lansing, for example, I think are having a moment where we're shifting the discussion from, oh, that's a family responsibility. Oh, that's a community-only responsibility, to saying, actually, this is infrastructure that matters intensely for the goals that we have as a state. For our talent goals, if we want to recruit people to Michigan, if we want to keep people in Michigan, we have to get all of those spaces right, no matter what we call them. And that includes making sure we can operate. I heard your general operation shout out there. It includes facilities and spaces, and we have, I think, good breadcrumbs when it comes to the work that we're doing at a state level, where we are taking some really important first steps, and we're hearing from legislators, we're seeing leadership from the governor that says, yes, we have to be making a state investment here. And when all of you go to your next meetings and the next meetings after that, having your voice continue to say, how are we thinking about the infrastructure of our childcare, after school, out of school time spaces, so that these aren't opportunities that just are available to families who are in the know, but they're available to every single family and every single student who needs and wants them.
And a couple of the stats, I mean, for every $1 invested after school, there's a $3 return on investment. And we know that, like, worrying about where your kids are costs the economy $300 billion a year of kids, our parents wondering about childcare or inconsistent childcare. I can't go to work today.
And this isn't someone else's problem. I mean, we are in the best resource room in the state of Michigan right now. And you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you know someone who set an alarm on their phone for summer camp sign up, sort of like concert tickets, right? How many of you have someone in your family who are on a wait list because they can't get into childcare? How many of you signed up for those programs? I signed up for childcare before I told my mother I was having a baby. Right? Those experiences, no matter how old your child is, which I took a quick straw poll, I've asked everyone, I said, my kids are 6 and 8, they cannot stay home alone. 15 minutes max. At what age, right? Where is the line? 12? How many programs, when you think about the opportunities that are available in your community, are really targeted towards 10, 11, 12-year-olds? Not enough of them. And yet those are children that no one would say, yes, let's leave a 10-year-old home alone 50 hours a week because their parents are going to go kick butt and take names at their job, which is what we want them to be able to do. And so if this room can't do it, no one can, right? It's an accident of luck, which is certainly not what we want for an infrastructure that's so critical for the goals that we have as a state.
Ridgway, Mott's looking across the country. How's Michigan stack up?
So Michigan's actually third in state funding, which is good. But if you look at number one, which is California, they're about $4 billion per year in after-school funding, and Michigan's proposing about $50 million in the government
Wow, it's
budget.
a big drop between one and
so
four.
if Michigan were in proportion to California, it would be about $1.3 billion a year in funding for after-school and out-of-school time.
Wow.
So we've got ways to go. But we've made the first step, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, you got to get started.
Great. It's a question here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kuhusa'a from Merritt. There we go. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kuhusa'a from Merritt in Detroit. In the lens of high quality and to King's point about asking young people in general, the questions. King, any advice? You have a funder, someone from the state, and an after-school provider on what high quality is to you, and any burning questions from the other three panelists while having King on stage.
High quality, great question. Thank you. High quality is trust. I trust that every day when I go to any after-school program, when I go home and I leave my phone somewhere, I know it's going to be there. When I go to school and I leave my phone somewhere, I'm not so sure, right? And high quality, it comes with trust. It comes with, when I go to this place, do I feel comfortable? Do I feel safe, right? And And also, do I feel like I'm going to gain something from this experience? Do I feel like I'm going to learn something, right? Students, we don't know anything about funding. We don't know what funding you're getting. We don't know what you're doing. We just know the impact that you're having on us, right? And if that's the case, then we should focus a lot about the connection, right? And we, of course, focus on funding. You know, we need that to keep it, to sustain it. But if the mission is the students, and we're focusing more so on funding, then, you know, it's not going to work, because at the end of the day, the mission is not getting done.
Wow. Kimberly,
Yes.
how would you respond to that, and how do you think students in your program would define quality?
I agree. I love the comment about trust. So in developing kids, it's been criticized that our team operates as a family, but we do. Sometimes you get along, sometimes you don't. But it's the same way with the young people. So there's a lot of intergenerational relationships that happen. We have alumni who come back. The young ones who are in high school and college mentor those who are in K through 8th grade. And I do leave my purse in the room, and there's young people in the room. And I know I shouldn't do that, but I do. You better not. Just leave it at that. Leave it at that. But I tell my team, you need to put your things away, because we do have some young people who are surviving, and it can look appealing. However, there are a lot of relationships, so I agree with that. On the funding piece, I know a gentleman who could not run his program because he didn't have funding at the last minute, because I think we're doing better, but for a long time, you wouldn't find out you had summer programming until June, right? So how do you run a quality program when you have 2 weeks to train, hire, and implement these activities? So he found out very late. He did not run his summer camp. Young man who was very active, who had come to him like, man, I was looking forward to participate, was killed that summer. And he took it very hard, because he said if he would have been in my program, maybe that wouldn't have happened. So the funding piece is real. Mm-hmm. You have to, you can get a couple dollars. I cannot feed 500 on 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, but I can tell you I fed 50 kids off of $30. I make it work. But when we talk about quality, how do we make sure that the kids have the supplies that they need, the team has the training that they need, that you can hire them not just to run the program, but to actually go to training for high quality standards to implement the programming. So all of that ties into funding. So it is a great piece, but the relationships matter.
Right.
Definitely.
Michelle, you want to jump in here?
We've heard in both of their answers the importance of people, and we've heard words like passion for this work, but I just want to be clear, we can't count on passionate people who are willing to work for really crummy wages if we want to sustain this system. And it's difficult to ask the field to advocate in that way. They do, and I really admire that, but it's a whole lot easier to come and have a conversation about expanding access to kids than it is to come and say, our child care system, I don't have the data at my fingertips for our after school, but there's a lot of overlap in the job classifications between folks in our economy who work in a child care position and folks in our economy who work in an after school position, and they are among the lowest paid people in the economy, period. And so how do we make sure that as we're advocating for this work, that we are continuing to center passionate individuals who we view as professionals, who we support, pay, train as professionals? That has to be a part of the conversation that we are willing to have as advocates in this space to continue to make sure that we can scale in a way that is right, like that does right by our kids, but also by the professionals who work in this space, because otherwise the people who are really driving the experiences that Kim and King are talking about, we're not gonna be able to keep them because they have families too. And we need to be able to support them in those aspirations in a field that they have a lot of passion in.
Wow. Another question.
Good afternoon, Jametta Lilly, Detroit Parent Network. And first off, a huge thank you for the dynamics that we see in front of us. This is an exciting time. I have 2 questions. We sometimes talk about children as if they're not connected to parents and to a home. So as we're looking at OST in a much more holistic way, in what ways can we be much more intentional not only in the design and having partnerships with parents of all generations, whether they're foster parents, whether they're older siblings, whether they are birth parents. So that's one question. I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on that. The other is, as we talk about design and being holistic, so much of the funding is child-centric. And there are many people in this room, certainly we are focused on how do we power up parents to really be a partner for the growth and development that we want for young people, and at the same time have programming that gives them access and equity to the things that they need. So one of the issues that I heard Kim speak to is that the very funding mechanisms themselves actually do not give the opportunity to organizations that want to have, in fact, a holistic approach to out of school time. I'd just like to hear you think about that, and how might we, this time next year, rethink what those RFPs look like, whether they come from philanthropy or whether they come from the state, and then in what ways are we beginning to ask the question to OST providers, in what ways are you specifically engaging and empowering parents as part of the population for the change that we're all working on?
Terrific question. So Michelle, how are you empowering parents? How are you engaging parents in your program? I'm sorry, Kimberly, how are you engaging parents in your program? Yeah, Michelle, how are you engaging parents at the state? I want to know.
So I would definitely say, I know Jametta a long time, and they do great work at Detroit Parent Network. So, but for developing kids, we had paint and plant night Tuesday night. And it is, so we have about 8 family engagement activities. There's no cost for our program, so there's no barrier for you to participate. It's free for you to engage with your families, and it's expected that you will engage in a programming when you register your child. I would say I was very pleased that in the MiLEAP 32M funding that just came out, there was a line item where you could, it was expected that you would engage young people and their parents and their families, so some family engagement activities. I'm starting to see it a little bit more, but it would be great. And if there was unrestricted dollars, then you could spread that around a little bit more to do those, because in my opinion, and for the success that we've had, the greater impact is because you reach and connect with the families. If they design, don't tell them, you need to go to financial literacy, you need to do this. Ask them. Again, them having their participation in the design of what the programming looks like. We recently had a youth summit, a teen and young adult summit at Chase Branch. We had over 30 parents that came and they wanted to stay. So they end up we created their own workshops with the bankers that were there, and about 6 of them signed up and opened up bank accounts that day on the spot. But it was providing opportunities where they get to learn along with their child. So I would say, again, unrestricted dollars, putting line items for funders where you can do some parent engagement, and then having parents engage so that they can share what they need. Bitcoin was huge. Parents wanted to know, should I invest in that? Is that something I should look at? There are a lot of schemes happening right now. And parents want the best for their children. They're trying to figure out how to do that. So if we can help them, again, as community, if they trust us, because they do, they trust the programs that their children are participating in, they will listen, they will take that advice.
Right. Michelle, does the state have a position on that, and its applications, its RFP? Were you asking that question?
Absolutely. So something that we've worked really hard with, frankly, a lot of people in this room, is to be able to say, how can we make $50 million of current investment go as far as possible? And how are we structuring an application that is really picky about where those dollars go, so frankly that we can come back here and make a case that we should continue to invest. And MiLEAP has been incredibly proud to partner with Aaron and the after school partnership on something we call the MOST committee, the Michigan Out of School Time Committee. Thank you, Aaron. I was like, where are the letters? But to be able to say, how do we structure together grant criteria that align with what you're trying to do, so that we're not asking you to take on a bunch of responsibilities. Now we're giving you money and asking you to do things that aren't the heartbeat of what you do, but that recognize that there are things that you're doing that are blurry. People's lives are blurry. It's not that they're coming to you and getting one transaction. They're coming to you and getting advice about supporting a behavior challenge with their child. They're getting recommendations for what you're watching on TV at night, right? What time bedtime is, connections to community resources. How do we recognize that in a grant application? And how do we honor that in the investments that you're making in your budget? And so we haven't, from a state state perspective said, here's the application, hope you apply, we've said, let's design an application together that lets you showcase the very best parts of your program, highlight places where we need to continue to grow as a sector, and continue to fund opportunities that we know are really critical for kids. And what I'll say is that we get far more applications than we can fund. So we have a $50 million investment. It's a very competitive application. And we have gone back to the legislature and been able to say, here's how many quality applications we could fund next if there were additional state resources to do that. And excited to continue, like I said, to work with all of you to tell that story. And Aaron has fact sheets that we can help circulate about what that looks like and what kind of impact we've been able to have so far. Parent engagement is a huge part of that, but it's one of many.
Great.
I personally would say parents are always engaged. It's their kids we're talking about. Like if the parents trust this place, right? If the parents trust this nonprofit with their children, and the children are coming back, hey, I love this place. This is really. Why should the parent be like, oh no, I'm going to take you somewhere else if your child is really loving this place? The parent is naturally engaged because that is their child. And I also want us to think about the fact that, have you had alumni from your program?
Yes.
And with that being said, with them going on to their future endeavors, I plan if there was truly an impact. Of course, I want to give back to the nonprofits organizations I've been a part of. And that's another way of the nonprofit being able to earn revenue or funding in a way is the people you give to are going to always give back if you made that connection true. So it's like if you have but if the alumni that you have, of course they would love to come back and give back because you gave them so much.
I think King has just advocated to be the next fundraiser and
Right.
relations.
Hey man, I got to make it. Somebody got to do it.
Jason.
Jason Lee, Junior Achievement. So when the statement was made that Michigan is third when it comes to out-of-school time funding, I looked around the room at the nonprofit leaders, and we were all kind of side-eyeing that. So I think a little more information about that would be really great to understand, and particularly when it comes to MiLEAP in terms of accessing those funds. Just a little elaboration there. And one of the major Achilles heels for many nonprofits is this conversation around transportation, and transportation, getting access to those programs and facilities. Just some discussion around that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things it says is that at 50 million, when I heard that, I said, we're third? Oh my God. We've been supporting 50 statewide network for 20 years. How can that be? A lot of it is that all these programs heavily rely on the 21st Century Program, but more importantly, they rely on foundations, private philanthropy, and business. And business is recognizing that out-of-school time support is really important. So I think that's one of the things that we need to figure out, and from a policy standpoint, is how to link business a little bit more together with philanthropy and groups to push for government, because it's really a bipartisan issue. I mean, you look at the numbers, 80% polling in support of out-of-school time support. It does show that it has a positive impact on the economy, and it, most importantly, has a positive impact on kids.
Let's stay on this track a minute. We'll come back to the transportation question. But have we done a good enough job explaining to the general public and business specifically the importance of after school and finding talent?
Probably not.
I mean, how do we do a better job of that? I mean,
I know one of the things we've partnered with is STEM Next, and you have the Million Girl Moonshot initiative, which is trying to get 1 million girls involved in STEM and out-of-school time. But there's so many other programs that are doing that. But it's holistically, we've got to do a better job of communicating it.
Yeah, Michelle, how do we get at that?
I think one of the challenges right now is it's so relationship based. It's a person who meets a person at a conference who says, I have an opportunity, and they connect. And that's fantastic in the community, in the sector where they're working together. And how do we systematize that? So when people say, I have something to offer from an employer perspective, or I have a need from a provider perspective, how do you do some matchmaking to support that work. And I think that's a challenge we have in the education space more broadly. I just left the conversation with our higher education presidents talking about creating those same connections for internships for students who are in our 2 and 4 year degree programs. What does it look like? That's what conferences like this are all about. How do we break down silos where we have different sectors working on the exact same challenges, but not always with an aligned agenda, with maybe an adjacent or a tangential agenda. I think that's a problem we have to continue to work on. It's something that is really built into the DNA of what MiLEAP is charged to do. How we get there, that's a question we're gonna have to continue working through with all of you, and would love to, after this panel, through this week, and when we're back in our respective home bases, to say, what does it look like to be able to strengthen that, not count on charismatic leaders who are making it happen. Again, that's great. But to make sure that when they're getting pulled in a whole lot of directions, Kim told me she was looking at construction plans that weren't being built per the plans today, right? It's like one of 6,000 things on a list that ultimately is about delivering for kids. How can we make that job just a little bit easier on all sides so that we can have programs that really benefit kids? We've got to work on that together.
Kimberly, are you working with businesses at all and communicating this importance? Are they seeing it?
Absolutely. One, we're a lead agency for the Grow Detroit Young Talent. So we have 200 young people that will be with us, 14 to 24 for the summer, those ages. We have placed 100 with us, but we're also sending 75 out to different companies. They're at law offices, they're at popcorn shops, they're at Focus Hope, they're at stores, local businesses. In addition to that, we've helped young people earn national and international fellowships that were in fields that they were interested in. We've supported them to apply for youth advisory boards with an MBA team. And now the young lady has received a full ride to go to school for broadcast journalism and sports. We have partnerships with a couple different companies. One of them is Kelly Services, and reaching out to them saying, what you do, we need to make sure our young people have the skills they need, not just to get a job, but to keep a job. How do they manage conflict and on the job? How do they communicate well? We need your support with that. So we started a partnership where every summer we take those young people out to their location. They create workshops all throughout the day. Interviewing skills, how your digital footprint, what that means, which then created a scholarship fund specifically for our participants, a renewable scholarship for 4 years. And just proud that this year we have our first set of interns who are there, interning with them, a remote work opportunity in their fields that they're looking to go into. So again, it's creating those pathways, but I'll go back to, as Michelle just said, you heard me say I've only been doing this full time for 4 years now, not even a full 4 years. Having the support, the capacity within an organization to be able to create those relationships and make those calls and take those visits.
Right. King, coming to you, I want to come back to this transportation question, and it's one, that discussion up here has been happening since I started coming to these things in 1997. We have a transit problem. How do you get to your after-school programs?
Well, they provide transportation oftentimes, as well as, my mom would make her way to allow us to attend those after-school programs. Transportation hasn't often been an issue. I feel like nonprofit organizations or leaders in the community have often thought about, how can we get our students here and there? And I would also like to add to the question that was just posed, is to think like a business, right? Think about competitors. What are our global competitors doing? What are they doing to push the needle forward for their people, right? What are things that they're learning in school, and what are things that the after-school programs are teaching them that are allowing them to dominate in certain areas, in certain fields? And I feel like we should look at what we're teaching instead of thinking about what the student has in terms of talent. No one is born with anything, right? What a person does for talent or in terms of passion, they were exposed to at a certain moment in time. If we are only exposed to being truck drivers, then that's what, the economy is gonna be. If we are exposed to different opportunities, then those opportunities are what other people are gonna strive to be. I've never heard anybody in my classroom say, I wanna be a pilot for Delta Airlines. I wish we had more conversations like that. And I actually got this, I heard this at the panel previously, that, it's about the exposure, right. And it's about it's about exposure and what we're teaching the students, and as well as what our global competitors doing. Because
only go to what you can see.
Exactly. We are competing for the same funding dollars, but we aren't necessarily competitors if we're trying to teach the same people.
Yeah. On the transportation issue, it's interesting that because of the poor public transit across the state, the responsibility for getting young people into these programs either falls directly on the parents or on the nonprofit that's got to provide the transit. That adds cost that's exorbitant and liability that's exorbitant. So we could talk about this one for about another hour and a half. I think we ought to just acknowledge it's there and we got to work on it and go to the next question.
I'm Tiffany Brown, founder and executive director of Developing Despite Distance. I first want to start by saying I think I can speak on behalf of everybody in the room, King. Your family named you right. And it's funny because I passed you in the hallway yesterday, your tag was tucked in, and I saw you and I said, "Hey, King," and I shook your hand and I said, "Take your tag out." And you were like,
ma'am.
"How did you know my name?" And I saw you, right? So you absolutely are a king, thank you. We know that inequities exist in the fundraising space for Black-led and Black-founded nonprofits, women-led and women-founded nonprofits. Kim, you represent so much in this space for me. Michelle spoke to the power of relationships. You have been a mentor for me and a partner and such an inspiration in your journey. And King, you also spoke to the power of us helping each other, right? And knowing that, you know, if we want support for Black people and Black young people, then we need to start by supporting ourselves, right? So my question is for Kim, how have you supported other grassroots leaders like myself in Detroit doing this hard work, who are funding, you know, our missions because of our lived experiences? You know, my nonprofit supports young men in Detroit that have incarcerated parents. My mother was incarcerated while I grew up in Detroit. And I've turned this into my career and my passion, and there's nothing else that I'd rather be doing. But I know that my colleagues in this room are doing this work from a real lived experience and a passion, and we'll do it without the money. But how are you creating initiatives and space to open up doors and relationships for people like me?
Thank you, Tiffany. It's a great question. What are you doing, Kimberly?
I am the co-founder of a group called the Black Executive Director Alliance of Detroit. Short term is BDAD, and we have about 55 members now at this point. It is open to youth serving nonprofits who are Black leaders in the city of Detroit, working with young people again. That's your focus. And it is open. There is a very small nominal fee to pay as membership, but we're trying to create opportunities. Number one, share what Tiffany just mentioned about there is some discrepancies against how Black-led organizations are funded against other nonprofit organizations. Also, lift the awareness. I had a cameraman one time for a news story tell me, "I want to give to Black nonprofits, but I don't know any." www.wearebdad.org. That's where you can go to find a list. And it's to bring more awareness to those organizations and then provide executive, high quality level training for how do we do better at fundraising? How can we do better at staffing our organizations to make sure we have quality practices in place?
Great. So last question, around the horn, fairly quickly. You have one wish to make for after school in Michigan that would come true in the next 2 years. Wow. Michelle, what is it?
I want to clone Kim. How do we have more? There's so many, insert so many of you in this room right here. How do we create more space for leaders who are showing up every day for our kids? That's the space that government can work in. How can we support what you're doing? How can we continue to advocate for funding so that there are more Kims supporting our kids?
Ridgway?
I think in the wake of COVID, kids have become more and more disconnected, and to the extent that we can reach a kid through after school or other means out of school time and just engage them in society, spark that curiosity that King mentioned, and kind of find that hero within is just the number one thing I'd love to see.
Great. How about you, Kim?
I want to see increased funding for out of school time funding. To go to a trusted intermediary, and I mean very much increased, with with organizations also, just as the MASP and most advisory committee, really working towards what that looks like, looking at the applications and make sure that it's equitable for all organizations to participate in.
Great. King, one wish.
To have more wishes. No. One wish. I would personally say I wish more nonprofit organizations would want to come together in terms of thinking of each other as competitors, because of the simple fact, to your testimony, Ms. Kimberly, of your friend who had a nonprofit and he didn't have the funding dollars. If there was a nonprofit he was partnered with, or at least he had a friendship with someone and he didn't have the funding dollars, he could have took those students and put them somewhere else. You know, and he could have looked at the students who he said, I wish that was my student because he got shot. He could have took that student and took him somewhere else if he didn't have that, a nonprofit for himself. We have all these nonprofits in the city, and to say that I wish he was a part of mine, I feel like that's kind of selfish, because there's too many out here to say that I wish he was a part of mine, where we can take him somewhere else or we can take her somewhere else. I wish there were more nonprofits thinking of each other as a unit instead of thinking of each other as competitors.
Okay. So you want to fix the talent gap in Michigan? You want to make sure we're dealing with daycare, safety, the right way. We want to make sure we're getting STEM in systems. You want to make sure that you're finding a way for employers to be a partner with young people and expose them to career opportunities. Find a way to support after school. Find a way to replicate this guy over and over and over again. Help me thank the